Well, again, Ben, thanks so much for inviting me to talk about what still works and what's new in onion thrips management. So, just to give everybody an idea of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start off by giving a bit of a review and list at least the reasons that I consider why onion thrips is and will likely remain a serious pest of onion. Next, I'm going to talk about onion thrips management with a focus on using insecticides, and I'm going to highlight the newest labeled product that we have that's called Vertento. And I imagine most of you have heard of Vertento by now. And then I'll finish up by talking about guidelines for a season-long onion thrips management program using insecticides, and I will also include examples where Vertento would be a nice fit. Okay, here is the insect of the hour, onion thrips. Scientific name is Thrips tabaci. It belongs to the order Thysanoptera and the family Thripidae. And this family Thripidae contains a lot of thrips pests of agricultural crops. So onion thrips originated in the Mediterranean region. And of course, it's now distributed across the world. And this insect has an enormous host range, includes hundreds of different plant species, but it really likes members of the Allium genus, in particular onion. So there are at least 5 reasons that I've come up with that make onion thrips such a serious pest of onion. And I'll just start with a first obvious one, and that is that when it feeds on leaves, it can end up reducing bulb size. And here's a classic example on the right of an onion plant that has been fed upon heavily by onion thrips. You can see that it's white. That's not overexposure of my camera. It's because most of the chlorophyll has been removed by thrips feeding. And of course, the earlier thrips infest onion and create this type of damage, the more the more impact it's going to have on reducing the size of those bulbs. And we know that bulb size can be reduced by as much as 60% when you get this heavy feeding. The next reason why thrips is such a big pest of onion is that it can spread pathogens. And the worst of the worst, or at least in my opinion, is iris yellow spot virus. This is a tospovirus. Other tospovirus, or another one that you probably have heard of, is tomato spotted wilt virus. So it's the same genus. And this particular virus causes iris yellow spot disease. And you can see the picture here of an onion plant with these straw-colored lesions. That's classic iris yellow spot disease. And when plants become infected early in its development, and if conditions are hot and dry, you can have an epidemic that causes complete loss of the crop, like you see here. All of these onions died essentially prematurely. We call them dying standing up. And the size of these bulbs are like maybe golf ball, ping pong ball size. They're not going to get any bigger. And most of them are going to end up rotting. What we find is when the crop dies standing up, that the bacterial pathogens can get in pretty easily through the neck. And what we find is that most of these bulbs end up rotting anyway. So it's really a huge problem. Onion thrips also are known to directly transmit bacterial pathogens, in particular Pantoia ananatus, that causes bacterial center rot. And we know that onion thrips, adults and larvae, when they feed on the leaves, they can predispose the crop to become infected with fungal pathogens like Alternaria pori that causes purple blotch and Stymphalium vesicarium that causes Stymphalium leaf blight. A third reason why onion thrips is such an important pest of onion is that it's prolific and has multiple generations. Now, here's some trivia that many of you may not know. Most onion thrips are all females, and they reproduce asexually through a form of parthenogenesis called thalidicy. So basically, these females don't need a male to mate, which is a lot faster, right? You don't have to find that male. And all of their eggs that they lay become females. And that's called thalidicy. So that's a pretty big evolutionary advantage for this insect because they don't need to find a mate. And then also, if you think about it, if there's a mutation in a thrips that allows it to become resistant to an insecticide, guess what? It doesn't need to find a male that also has that gene for resistance so that to mate and then to be able to produce more resistant individuals. It can just lay a bunch of resistant eggs. So that's a pretty big deal. Let me just go through the life cycle of an onion thrips. So we know that the adults can overwinter in the Great Lakes area in the soil. In the spring, maybe in a warm spring, you can see some emergence from the soil in April, maybe late April. Adults emerge. You know they don't need to mate to lay eggs, right? They lay eggs in the onion plant, in the onion leaves, and each female can lay anywhere from 60 to 200 eggs, and they can hatch anywhere to 4 to 10 days, and that's all based on temperature, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So the eggs are laid in the leaves, and then they hatch into larvae, and there are 2 instars in the larval stage, a first and a second instar, and that lasts about 7 to 10 days. That second instar, when it's completed its development, it'll become a prepupa. That prepupa then will walk down from the plant into the soil. When it's in the soil, it then will become a pupa. Looks very similar. It doesn't move in the pupal stage, and it will stay in the soil for 5 to 7 days before emerging as an adult. So that's the life cycle. I want to show you the impact that temperature can have on different life history traits of the onion thrips. All right. This information was generated from a study out of Japan 6 years ago. So I just want to mention that. And we're going to start off with the life history trait of number of eggs laid per female at 4 different temperatures, 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 86. So you can see here that the sweet spot is actually 73 degrees Fahrenheit. So you go from 210 to 270 to 165 to 63 eggs per female. So what happens is at these higher temperatures, it's just not very good for onion thrips. They just don't lay as many eggs under those really, really hot temperatures. If you look at the surviving number of offspring surviving to adulthood, we see the same pattern, that sweet spot is around 73 degrees Fahrenheit, but then drops off precipitously as temperatures get higher. So basically what this means is that a single female can lay 270 eggs, but only 203 are going to actually make it to the adult stage. Okay. And then finally, generation time. And this actually is the biggest one of the 3. So based on the temperatures here, we see that a thrips can complete a single generation at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, that's average, about a month and a half. At 73 degrees, a little over a month, 77 degrees a month, and at 86 degrees, a little over 2 weeks. Okay, now I want to show you a real-world example based on temperatures that are typical of the Great Lakes area. So if you look at the averages across, say, beginning in late May, when we might see onion thrips colonizing onions, late May until, say, early September, the average ambient temperature is typically between 68 and 73 degrees Fahrenheit. The actual average is about 70. But as you know, you can have periods where it gets into the 90s and whatever, but on average, it's going to be somewhere in the 68 to 73 degree range. So I'm going to use an example, well, actually in just a minute. But first, in terms of when onion thrips show up, typically when plants have about 3 to 4 leaves. Why is that? Well, onion thrips, and here's another trivia term, onion thrips are thigmotactic, all right? That means that they like to be in contact with surfaces, and they like the nooks and crannies of the onion plant. Well, you're not going to have nooks and crannies until you have about 3 to 4 leaves, and that allows them to hide from predators and these types of things. So you're going to see colonization around 3 to 4 leaves, and based on the temperatures that I just explained to you, there can be about 2 to 3 generations per season before the crop is harvested. And of course, you know, if you have an early maturing variety like Highlander, you're going to start harvesting that sometime in July. If you have a late later maturing cultivar, there's lots of examples. Maybe you're not going to harvest that until sometime in September or even early October. So at any rate, there could be 2 to 3 generations completed based on those average temperatures. Okay, now I want to show you an example. So we're going to look at an average temperature of 73 degrees Fahrenheit. So this may be kind of in a bad thrips year where we have a lot of hot, dry conditions. On the y-axis here, we have the number of onion thrips adults, and of course, most of these are females, right? In the millions. All right, so I'm tipping my hand a little bit about what I'm going to show you. We're going to start with one female in late May, okay? And she's going to lay she's going to lay 270 eggs, but we know that only 203 are going to survive, right? Based on the information I just showed you. And again, this is a theoretical example. No pesticides are going to be applied in these onions that I'm going to tell you about. So we know that 37 days later, that one female will produce 203 babies, and actually 270 eggs, but only 203 are going to survive. So 203 babies after that first generation. But we know that those 203 females will each produce 270 eggs, but only 203 live, right? So basically 203 times 203 for that next generation. Now we're up to 41,209 thrips. Now I know you look at that line and you say, Brian, it's at 0. No, it's at 41,209, but look at that scale. That scale goes to 9 million, all right? So that's why it looks like it's flat, but it's increasing exponentially. So this one female so far has produced, after a little over 2 months, 41,209 grand babies. Those 41,209 individuals will each give rise to 203 individuals. Now, guess what we have? Whoops, wrong way. 8,300,000+ thrips. Okay, so based on, and again, you know, this is kind of a perfect scenario. We don't have any insecticides going on in this theoretical field. But what it shows you is that if 3 generations can be completed in a field, a single female can produce 8,365,427 great grandbabies. Okay, so that tells you that if you let onion thrips get out of hand, or if you've noticed sometimes that, oh my gosh, I was just in this field last week and things look fine and now all the plants are white. Well, guess what? This is why, is this exponential population growth. So oftentimes you don't see this incredible increase of onion thrips until later in the season, maybe as early as maybe late July, but especially in August. And you can see a pattern like what you see here, where the edge of the field is turning white because the onion thrips are colonizing it, typically from the edge, and they're coming in. I call it a thrips tsunami because they just come in like a tsunami into the field. And the question then is, well, where are they coming from? Well, sometimes they could come from, say, an alfalfa field that maybe has been cut, or when small grain fields mature. But more often than not, what we see is they're coming from another onion field. And it's very common to have onion fields that vary in maturity that are next to each other. A scenario like this, where you have an early maturing field there on the right, that it's mature, the leaves have landed appropriately, but this is no longer an attractive host for onion thrips. The eggs that they lay on these dying onion plants aren't going to allow their progeny to survive to adulthood. So these adults are going to migrate to the next best field, the field that's still actively growing, like a later maturing field. All right, so they're going to move in this direction. And onion thrips, they can fly long distances, but they won't if they don't have to. All right, they're going to go to the closest host that they can. So that's why you see these heavy edge effects in some cases, oftentimes nearest a field that's maturing. Okay, Another reason why onion thrips such an important pest of onion is that there's really only one effective management tool, and that tool is insecticide use. Okay, we don't really have the luxury of using other management tactics that are effective. I've spent a lot of years looking at different cultivars that have been bred to be resistant to thrips. And sometimes they actually do reduce thrips densities, but guess what? They all have low levels of waxes on those leaves. And guess what happens in our climate with low waxes? You're right, they melt when Stemphylium vesicarium comes in. Stemphylium leaf blight just will absolutely take them down. So we don't have good plant resistance. Cultural controls, well, you could all grow short maturing varieties like Highlander, plant them early or transplant them and then harvest them in early July. That would shorten the season where you wouldn't have to battle thrips as long, but it's not feasible to all grow short maturing varieties because you can't harvest them all at the same time. You have to stagger planting. And yeah, anyway, so planting date, harvest date, really not much of an option unless you've got a very small operation where you could get by with just a short maturing variety. And then biological control, we've looked at that also, mainly in terms of naturally occurring predators and that type of thing. And unfortunately, they just don't work fast enough to control or bring down a population that might be slipping. So we're really forced to optimize our use of insecticides. And of course, as you know, that can be a problem when populations become resistant to the products that we're using. And these are just some studies that have documented resistance to different insecticides in the Great Lakes region. A couple studies in New York, one in Ontario, Canada, documented resistance in onion thrips populations to pyrethroids, carbamates, and organophosphates. You may say, well, Brian, there's resistance in Michigan. Well, of course there is. It just nobody maybe have published a study that has shown that. And there's certainly resistance, I think, to other products too. But anyway, the point is that resistance is a big deal. We want to avoid it. I just finished a little bit of background on why onion thrips has become such a serious pest and will probably continue to be. Now I'm going to talk a bit about management using insecticides. And I think it's really important to know that we really need to optimize insecticide use. And that's going to involve three major issues. Number one, you have to use appropriate application methods. Number two, you need to use effective products. And lastly, you need to time those insecticides appropriately. And I'm going to go through all of these now. First of all, in terms of application methods, gallonage is really important. You have to make sure that you get good coverage of the leaves. So use as high of a volume as possible. Maybe 20 gallons when your first few applications when the crop is small, but when that crop gets larger canopy, jack up that volume as much as you can. Check the water, the pH. Most of these products are going to work well at a pH of anywhere from 5 to 7, and it may say on the label. Pressure. Don't jack your pressure up to 100, 150, 200 psi, because you know what happens? Your insecticide is going to end up in the trees or about 5 miles down the road. You want to use as low of pressure as you can get away with. And I know you're thinking, well, Brian, you got to blast that pesticide into the neck where the onion thrips are hiding. And the only way to do that is jacking up that pressure. Well, believe you me, if you have enough gallonage, you're going to get some of that insecticide down into the neck of the onion. Plus, the onion thrips don't stay in that neck all the time. They may be there during the day, but at night they'll move around on the leaves. So 40 to 55 psi seems to be pretty decent, large drops if you can. You want to get good coverage. We found that twin flat fan nozzles work pretty well. In terms of adjuvants, a non-ionic surfactant also is a good choice. There's lots and lots of different options. MSO, Li700, dynamic, induce. There's a bunch. And then finally, tank mixing can be tricky. Avoid some combinations. In particular, be very careful to avoid using spirotetramat. That's going to be either Movento or Senstar with chlorothalonil fungicides. That's going to be Bravo, Weatherstick, Chloranil, and some others. And I'm going to talk more about tank mixing with Bravo in a few minutes. Effective products. Use an effective product. Now, here are some. Now, you may say, well, yeah, Brian, I agree with 80% or 75% of these products, but Warrior certainly is not an effective product, and Lanate is an effective product. Well, when you combine the two, they can be effective. Okay, so, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about tank mixes in a minute as well. But at any rate, here are some products that are commonly used. In most cases, they can be effective. And the other point I want to make is the IRAC class. These are different classes of insecticides, and we have 7. And that's awesome when it comes to designing insecticide resistance management plans. And I'll talk about those in detail in a few minutes as well. You'll notice that I have a new product listed here, Vertento, and it belongs to a novel class of chemistry, which is awesome. So the active ingredient in Vertento is called isocycloserum. It's an isoxaline insecticide. It inhibits the GABA-gated chloride channel. If you look at the label, not only does it include thrips, but also leaf miners and spider mites. And I don't know about you all, but we get spider mite issues when it's hot and dry, like last year. The rate on the label is 3.1 to 4.1 fluid ounces per acre, and it indicates don't make more than 2 sequential applications per season. And I'll talk more about the separation of those 2 sequential sprays in a few minutes as well. And then, of course, rotate with other products, different modes of action. Okay, I've worked with this product for a long time, long before it got the name Vertento and long before it got the name Planazoline Technology. But I'm going to show you a few data sets, starting with one in 2023. It's always important to know what product you can use when you have a runaway train or a tsunami of thrips, and you need to get that population back under control. For many, many years, that we call it a hammer. That hammer was Radiant. We could even use it at 6 to 8 fluid ounces per acre. Then it's 10 ounces per acre. Now it may not be a hammer at all. Exerol at the highest labeled rate of 20.5 fluid ounces per acre, or even a pint per acre, is our current hammer. So we were curious to know, could Vertento become that hammer? So in 2023, we evaluated, compared these 3 products with each other. They were all co-applied with Dynamic. We used twin flat fan nozzles, 40 GPa, 40 PSI. Only 2 applications spaced 1 week apart, beginning late in the season, July 31st, when there were 12 larvae per leaf. This was unbelievably high infestation. But that was what we wanted. We wanted to see if these products could handle a high population. 2 applications were applied, and then 1 week after that second application is when we took the data. The experiment was conducted in Elba, New York, in a field here of onions. And here are the results 1 week after that second application. The y-axis, we had the mean number of larvae per leaf, and in the untreated control, over 40 larvae per leaf. Those plants were turning white. This is a really, really high infestation. Radiant failed to control this high population. Exerol and Vertento significantly reduced thrips compared to the untreated. And if, just for reference, I put the action threshold of 1 larvae per leaf here, we see that actually neither or none of the products were able to reduce the population below the action threshold, but Vertento did a pretty good job of getting it almost to 1 or below. There's only 1.2 thrips per leaf. And given the high population, I would say that is a huge success. So I would say right now, in terms of a hammer, Exerol and Vertento are our hammers. Radiant, we've lost, at least in the Elba muck area. I think that Radiant at 10 fluid ounces still could work in some other regions in New York and maybe in Michigan. But I think it's something you need to be wary of. Because in Western New York, we have Movento, we have Exerol as our only hammers and only products that are super effective. We're losing Radiant, and we don't have Vertento. I hope we will get it. As many of you know, New York doesn't get products like everywhere else in the United States, we have to go through another process. I'm hopeful, very hopeful, that we'll get Vertento in time for 2026. But we needed to explore another option. So we got inventive and tried some different tank mixes. So here's a partial list of the products. We had Vertento, 2 rates of Exerol, at the low rate and a pint rate. We had Lanate at the high labeled rate and Radiant at a high labeled rate. And then we had some combinations of Lanate with other products like a Sail, Warrior, a 3-way combination of Lanate, Warrior, and Agramec. We call that the trifecta. And then we looked at Radiant also with a Sail, Warrior, Agramec, and then Azadirect and Impede. Again, just seeing if, with Radiant slipping, if we added something to it, could we raise the level of control? In this particular study, we applied all of these treatments 4 times a week apart. The rationale being that we wanted to make sure that we covered one of these influxes of thrips. We didn't know exactly when it was going to occur. So we spray 4 times weekly, and then we take data 1 week after that 4th application. And I'm going to show you that data in a minute. We started on the July 1st. The last spray was going to be typically around maybe 28th of July. So I'm going to show you results there in early August. Here's what we got. Well, actually, late July. So just to orient you, on the y-axis, we have the mean number of thrips larvae per leaf in the different treatments. And in untreated control, we had a little over 16 larvae per leaf. So again, very high population. And the rest of the different products here. So because there's a lot going on here, I'm going to cut to the chase. Everything that was better than the untreated control are highlighted here in green. So Vertento, both rates of Exerol, Lanate plus Warrior, Lanate plus Warrior plus Agramec were the only products that were better than the untreated control. Let's look one step further. Which treatments were able to knock the population down to below the threshold of 1 larva per leaf? Basically, everything that I just showed you, except Lanate plus Warrior, dropped out. But we have here that has risen to the occasion is this 3-way tank mix of Lanate, Warrior, and Agramec. This is what I'm going to call as the trifecta, and can be used in a situation where you need to really do a good job of controlling thrips that may be on a very high density level. Another big issue is tank mixing insecticides with fungicides. And in most cases, no issue at all. One issue that has occurred in the past is with Bravo Weather Stick or chlorothalonil. We see that in particular with Movento, it inhibits the ability of Movento to work very well. So we wanted to know how tank mixing Bravo with other products might impact thrips control. So this study was conducted this past year. So we had all the same treatments that I just mentioned in the previous slide. We did add Azadirect plus Impede. This is a combination of insecticides that are used in the Western United States early in the season to control thrips. So we thought, well, let's give it a try here. And then we looked at some of these treatments tank mix with Bravo Weather Stick at the high labeled rate of 3 pints per acre. So we had Exerol, Lanate plus Warrior plus Agramec, Radiant, and Azadirect plus Impede plus the Bravo. Again, 4 applications, and I'm going to show you the results 1 week after that 4th application. We see in the untreated control over 30 thrips per leaf, so a very high infestation. And again, cutting to the chase of the products that were better than the untreated control, we see Vertento, both rates of Exerol, Lanate, the trifecta of Lanate, Agramec, and Warrior. And then we see basically, with the exception of Radiant and Azadirect Impede that didn't work, the others worked fine, tank mixing with Bravo Weather Stick. So that's good news when you have botrytis. And if you're using Bravo for Staphylium, I don't know, that may happen on occasion, but certainly for botrytis, that you're going to be able to tank mix. We did see that Vertento plus Bravo Weather Stick was not really compromised. The level of thrips control went down to 1.2 thrips per leaf. So it wasn't below 1, but it was just above. I still would consider that not to be a real important impact of the tank mix. Okay, I'm going to finish up this section by talking about appropriate application frequency of insecticides. And that is going to be explained in the context of insecticide resistance management. This is really, really important because we are so reliant on just insecticides to control thrips. It's critical that you rotate into active ingredients that belong to different classes. Don't use a product more than twice. And if you're going to use it twice, use it consecutively, 7 to 10 days apart, not 21 days apart, not 28 days apart. And I'll explain why in a minute, but 7 to 10 days apart. And then next, use action thresholds. This will overall limit the number of insecticide applications that you may need to control an infestation. And then finally, combine these two to create a season-long program. And I'm going to talk a lot about that in a few minutes, of coming up with a season-long program of insecticides. Okay, so here's our scenario. We got to manage onion thrips from, let's say, early June to late August. We may have as many as 3 generations per season, as I just explained earlier, but they're going to overlap, right? This is going to be messy. You're going to have influxes of thrips, and it's going to, the generations are going to be offset a bit, but I think it's going to get too complicated to talk about all those other scenarios. So let's just talk about one that's relatively reasonable. You're going to have 3 overlapping generations. You're going to apply products like this. You're going to choose different products that belong to different classes of chemistry, and we're going to generically call them products A, B, C, and D. You're going to use no more than 2 applications, and you're going to use them back to back. Why? Because if you spread them out or go with product A, then product B, then product C, then product D, and then do it all over again, you're going to expose multiple generations with a single active ingredient or a class of chemistry. You don't want that, because you're going to expose multiple generations of the same product, and that's going to basically exacerbate or accelerate the possibility of resistance development. So we got to do our best to limit that. So if we use products like this, that's going to help. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a number of effective products or combinations of products, and we've got 7 different classes of chemistry to work with. So that's a great thing for coming up with a plan like I just mentioned. And I also want to indicate that on the label, it often says use only a couple sprays or a maximum of 2 sequential applications. The exceptions are lanate, you can use up to 4 applications, and down here, warrior, you can use up to 8 applications, but you don't want to, okay? So let's just look at a potential effect, an example of a rotation like I just mentioned. So maybe starting out with Vertento or Senstar, then maybe transitioning to Agrimec or Radiant. And if you need to, if you can't control a population of thrips in your crop with more that are with only 3 insecticides applied twice a piece, maybe you have to finish up with 8 sprays and maybe using Extral. So here you have exactly what I just said. You have 4 different classes of chemistry. None of them are sprayed more than 2 times, and you're going to theoretically reduce the exposure of more generations using this strategy. Okay, but there may be scenarios where you don't necessarily need to spray every week, right? So we know that the action or economic injury level for onion thrips on onion is a season average of 2.2 thrips per leaf or more. So that doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, the population in my field is at 3 thrips per leaf, I'm going to lose yield. No. If you sustain an average population over the season of 2.2 above that line, yes, you probably will lose yield. But it's okay that if the population on 1 week exceeds it and you use a product, you knock it back down to 1 or below that level, you're okay. And what I've learned over the years is that using an action threshold of 1 thrips per leaf for most of these insecticides, you can bring down that population to ensure that it stays below the 2.2 ceiling, okay? Okay, so that's where that action threshold of 1 thrips per leaf comes in. But as you all know, sometimes an insecticide could still work at levels above that. And I just showed you that with Vertento and Exeril. They can take down a population that exceeds that, but this is kind of a general threshold to go by. Okay, and if you use a combination of these products and thresholds, it may be that in certain years where maybe the pressure isn't super high, you could start off with product A and it works so well that you could take a couple weeks off and maybe not even use product B at all. Maybe the population after that increases and then you do have to use product C maybe a couple times. And then product D, you may only have to use once. So a real world scenario might be something like this, where you use Movento or Senstar, 2 applications, 7 to 10 days apart. You then ride the momentum of Movento, right? Where you don't need to spray anything maybe for 2 weeks, maybe 3. The population finally gets up to 1, and then maybe use Radiant a couple times, maybe Exral at a pint rate, and then you're done for the season, okay? So in this case, combining the sequence with thresholds, instead of spraying 8 times, you can get by with 5 times and still keep that population well below the economic entry level for the season. Okay, now I'm going to finish up by talking about some guidelines. Now, we could end right here. If you ask me, Brian, I want to know what the best program is for onion thrips today. I'm going to give you my Cadillac. It's going to be expensive. Can you all see that? It's going to be expensive, okay? But these are the best. Start off with Movento, then you go to Vertento. If you have a late maturing variety where you know you still have 30 days before harvest, you could use the trifecta, the Lanate plus Warrior plus Agromec. And then you finish off with your Exral, maybe a pint per acre. That's your Cadillac. That works. But you know what? You may say, that's good. I'm done. I'm logging off right now. You're all set for 2026. But you know what? This may be overkill. If you have maybe a lower population, or maybe, you know what? Maybe you don't necessarily want to use Vertento, or you want to use it only when you need to. Or there may be a lot of other reasons why you may not want to follow this scenario. So we're going to go through some updated guidelines, and I'm going to go through 4 other examples. So some of you that may have seen my flow chart over the years, well, I've got a new way to illustrate the onion thrips management guidelines. And when I say I really mean we. It's going to be me and Christy Hopteen, who many of you probably know. She's a Cornell Cooperative Extension educator in New York with responsibilities for onions. We both started a couple months apart back in 2001, so we know onions, we know thrips. And the two of us, with our experience, 25 years of experience, we put our heads together and came up with this new set of guidelines. So what's a little different is that here we include an action threshold, and there are 3 different action thresholds. They're based on the density of the onion thrips. We have low density, which is going to be an average number of thrips per leaf of 0.6 to 1. We have medium density of 1.1 to 2, and then high density, anything 2.1 or above. We've got a season that's going to involve sprays as many as typically 5 to 6, but in case you need more than that, we could go to 7 and 8. So now I'm going to walk you through this. So at low density, we know that the best thing to start off with is Movento or Senstar. It's systemic. It works really well up until you have a bulb size of about 1/2 inch. And after that, we see that the physiology of the plant changes, and Movento and Senstar is not as effective. So it's got to be early. And we got to keep it because it still works well. So start off. That's pretty much the only option I would recommend for the first couple sprays this season. Next, sprays 3 and 4, there are 3 different choices. This is not a tank mix of Agromec, Lanate plus Warrior, and Radiant. These are 3 different individual choices. Maybe Agromec, maybe Lanate plus Warrior, or maybe Radiant. Same thing for sprays 5 and 6. Maybe one of these 3. When we get to medium density, again, hopefully you will not reach 1.1 to 2 before you spray anything in your field. But if so, Movento and Senstar will still be fine. But hopefully you'll be up here in the low density. But for medium density, you have 3 different choices. You could use Monecto Pro, Exral at 13.5 or 16 fluid ounces per acre, or you could use our new Vertento at the low labeled rate of 3.1. Same thing for sprays 5 and 6. But of course, you wouldn't want to use the same one for 3 and 4 and then 5 and 6, obviously, based on what I just told you. And then for the high density, obviously Movento or Senstar, but we could use the trifecta of Lanate plus Warrior plus Agramac. We could use Exral at the pint or 20.5 fluid ounce rate, which is higher than what you might use here, and Vertento at 3.1, or you could go as high as 4.1. Maybe the first spray could be 4.1, and then maybe the second one 3.1. Same thing for 5 and 6. If you have a late maturing variety, it's a really horrendous thrips year, and you have to continue to spray, you could use these particular products for 7 and 8, depending again on density. All right, there are lots of caveats to this, and I think it's easier to talk about the caveats by talking about examples. So I'm going to go through 4 examples now. Example number 1, high thrips pressure. Okay, so early on, the thrips population should be monitored weekly, ideally in your fields. And once we get to 0.6 or 0.1, we need to start pulling the trigger. What are we going to pull the trigger with? Obviously, Movento or Senstar. Okay, 2 applications. Don't use 1, use 2. Either 2 Movento or Senstar and then a Movento. 2 Senstars, it could be a little tricky because if you read the label, it says 14 days in between. But anyway, we need to use a spirotetramat-based product. Another thing is that at 0.6, you put on your first application, it does not surprise me. In fact, I would expect 1 week later for the population to go up. Don't get freaked out, okay? That's just because the eggs that were in the plant have hatched and they haven't had time to be killed yet by that first Movento spray, okay? This is very, very common. But definitely put on that second spray. And then after that, you may see that the next week that you're well below threshold. Okay, in that case, take a week off. No sense spraying when you're below threshold. But what we often see in Elba in particular, in some years, that, oh my goodness, you take a week off, then the next week we have blown out the thrips population. We have a tsunami occurring. Maybe they migrated in from alfalfa or small grains. We don't know. But that population is sky high. We are really in trouble, or are we? We are at 6.4 thrips per leaf. That puts us in the high density. All right, time to get out a hammer. Well, I just told you we have 2 hammers. Actually, we probably have 3 now with a trifecta. But let's go with Vertento. Maybe with the first application, maybe we go with 4.1 fluid ounces per acre, or maybe the second one we drop down to 3.1. And we may not see, again, with that Vertento, 1 application, don't expect it to be 0 the next week, okay? It's got a high or long residual activity, but under high pressure, you're not going to necessarily see that thing drop to below threshold after 1 spray. You're going to need that second spray 7 to 10 days later, believe you me. After that, second spray, hopefully it will be below threshold. It may not be, but it's going to be pretty close, okay? So in this generic example, let's say it's below. You take a week off. But then because pressure is high, it may get back up to 2. And in that case, we're now at the medium density. Let's finish off with Exral. Okay, we can't use Vertento again. We can't use Manecto Pro. Why? Well, it's got abamectin in it. 30-day pre-harvest. All right, we're too late in the season, potentially. Well, maybe not, but you need to start thinking about it. But Exral would be a good choice to finish off, okay? So you have your 2 applications of Exral. Most likely, then you're going to finish off the season. The crop is landed, you're done, okay? So maybe only 3 products are all that will be needed. Let's now look at example number 2, medium pressure. Well, we're going to start off the same with our Movento or Senstar. We may get the momentum of Movento for a couple weeks where we're below threshold, but then it creeps up, but we're at only 1.7. So we're in this medium density range. What are you going to use? Well, Manecto's pretty cheap, right, and good. So let's go with Manecto Pro. 2 applications of Manecto Pro. What happens after that? Well, it's going to hold the population. It could drop it, but let's say it holds it. We're hovering around threshold, but we're above. What are we going to use next? Well, maybe we want to use Vertento, maybe that 3.1 fluid ounce rate. Again, most likely 2 applications, maybe only 1 and you're done. I don't know. Well, it really depends. But let's say you have to use 2 back to back. You should be done for the rest of the season after that. Example number 3, low pressure. You're going to start off with Movento or Senstar. You're going to get the momentum of Movento for a couple weeks, okay? And let's say now you creep up, you're right at threshold of 1 thrips per leaf. What are you going to use? Well, maybe Agrimec. Agrimec's cheap. If it still works on your farm, go for it. No reason why you can't. 2 applications, assuming again that you still have at least 30 days before the bulbs are in your barn, right? It's got that 30-day pre-harvest interval. Maybe the 2 applications, you're below threshold, or actually in this case, you're right at it, right? You're close enough to 1, right? Maybe you have some hot, dry weather coming. You need to spray something. Well, if Radiant still works on your farm, Radiant could be a good example. If not, maybe Galantic plus Warrior. So go with a couple applications of Radiant at that 10 fluid ounce rate, and that hopefully will land your crop. The last example I'm going to provide is example 4, where you have low pressure for the entire year, and then all of a sudden you get this late season spike. So we see sometimes this, where everything is dandy, you're having a good time, and then, oh, you get this blowout. And maybe this is where you have an earlier maturing field, or you harvest next to this field, and all the thrips just boil over right into this field. And you're now you've got a tsunami, you need to take it down. What are you going to take it down with? Well, there's really only 2 examples, because the trifecta you can't use that because that's got a 30-day pre-harvest interval. So you basically have either Exral or Vertento. Now you say, Brian, why do you have Exral circled? Well, here's why. In a scenario where you have such a high population, certainly you're going to be able to take it down with Exral. You can take it down with Vertento. Absolutely you can. But what concerns me is that you're basically done, right? So you're not going to spray anything after this. And anything that survives a Vertento, and remember, you've got a high population, so that the numbers game, right? The probability of having a gene that is going to confer resistance to Vertento is going to be more likely if you have a high population than a lower one, right? So we need to preserve Vertento as long as possible. So let's hedge our bets here and go with our Exral. Exral's been around for a while. I mean, I don't want resistance to it either, but between the 2, let's preserve Vertento and let's go with Exral there at the end of the season. Okay. So I'm going to finish up now. So there's still some time for questions. So the highlights are Vertento and our trifecta of tank mix of Lanate, Agrimec, and Warrior can be highly effective against thrips, even when the populations are high, or even in a population where resistance may be developing to Radiant. Tank mixing insecticides with Bravo did not compromise thrips control. Again, the exception is going to be don't do it with Movento or Senstar. And then finally, Vertento should really be used, let's say, in the middle of a season-long program. Don't use it before Movento or instead of Movento, because we got to have Movento. And don't use it at the very end of the season if you can help it. I'd like to acknowledge my lab that has been instrumental in collecting a lot of the data that I showed you today. Christy Hopeteen, my partner in crime, every year working on finding the best way to manage onion thrips and onion. Max Torrey and Big O Farms for letting me do this research every year on his farm, and a number of other agencies that have supported the programs financially. So with that, let's go to some questions.